Yo, Atlas speaking and welcome to part 4 of What If I Was Reborn in Naruto as a civilian stuck in a time loop with the gamer system. Let the tale begin. Chapter 61, Minato, you're back, Hiruzen said as he looked at Minato. Shimura Danzo meanwhile simply stood by the side, not even giving a glance toward the young man and the kids behind him. Yes sir, I'm here to report about the completion of the Kanabi Bridge mission, Minato replied as he gave a bow toward the Hokage. The three behind him, Kazuo included, followed suit as they gave a respectful bow toward their leader. I see, well then what's the report? Hiruzen asked. Danzo still didn't make any move to get out of the room, clearly showing his intent on listening to the report. Hiruzen didn't tell him off either. It was Kakashi who stepped up as Minato turned to give him a glance. Yes sir, the Kanabi mission faced some challenges, however it was completed successfully. My team however had to split into two parts during the midsection of the mission, so I will only be able to give the first half of the report. The second half will be given by Chunin Kazuo. Kakashi said, his turbulent emotions already under his control as he faced the military leader. I see, you may continue, Hiruzen replied as he gave a shallow nod of his head. Kakashi followed with a nod of his own before starting his report. We were transported to a location close enough to the Kanabi Bridge by Minato Namikaze, after which my team consisting of Noara Rin, Chunin Kazuo as well as Uchiha Bito departed toward the Kanabi Bridge. After a while, we encountered enemy Iwabikure ninjas, one of which managed to kidnap our teammate Noara Rin. After Uchiha Bito, Chunin Kazuo, and I eliminated the other, we decided to split off the team. Kakashi said before taking a short breath of air and continuing once more. Uchiha Bito and I would be going to save Noara Rin from the kidnapper, whilst Chunin Kazuo would continue the official Kanabi Bridge mission on his own. Uchiha Bito and I quickly traced the kidnapper using my summoned Ninken and his Sharingan. After an intense fight, the Iwabikure ninja caused a collapse of the cave where we were in. This led to Uchiha Obshio's death as well as him giving me a parting gift. Kakashi said as he finally opened his left eye. It was a stark contrast from his right eye, which was pure black. This eye was blood red with two tomos swirling around a black pupil in the middle. It was the Sharingan of the Uchiha clan. It was at this moment that the atmosphere in the office changed drastically. Hiruzen's and Danzo's eyes immediately tightened as they gazed at Kakashi. Minato meanwhile bore a shocked look that he quickly concealed a moment later. You're saying that Uchiha Obshio was fatally injured and gave you his Sharingan as a parting gift? Danzo finally spoke up for the first time since the team had come inside the office. Kakashi turned to face the man and gave a light nod. My eye was slashed during the previous encounter when Noara Rin was kidnapped. Uchiha Obshio told us that he wanted him to continue seeing the world through me during his death, Kakashi replied, his voice becoming stone cold. It was clear that this was a hard matter to talk about for Kakashi, who had lost his teammate merely hours ago, however it had to be done. I see. Well, then we will have to talk about this later on, Hiruzen said as he nodded his head toward Kazuo. Walking toward the front whilst Kakashi headed to the back of the office once more. Kazuo felt slightly dizzy. The situation was tense, especially after the reveal of the Sharingan. Chunin Kazuo will now begin reporting the second half of the Kanabi Bridge mission, Kazuo said whilst giving Hiruzen a shallow bow of his head. After parting with Team 7, I headed directly toward the Kanabi Bridge at the highest possible speed I could achieve. After arriving there, I used the hiding like a mole technique to set up explosion tags at strategic locations, Kazuo said as he described the scene clearly, his words concise and his expression a calm poker face. However, during this time, I found out about a large army of Iwabikure ninjas heading toward the bridge. Deciding that I didn't have time to stick around for long, I made a shadow clone jutsu and used it as both a distraction and a means to activate the explosion tags whilst I headed back toward the location Kakashi and I had decided to meet after the completion of the mission. Kakashi, who was at the back, nodded his head. After arriving at the location, I quickly asked Kakashi to signal Minato Namikaze that we were in dire need of help. With around 1,000 enemy shinobi chasing after us, we had no way to run, and thus I decided to bait for time. Engaging the Iwabikure shinobi into a heated discussion and enraging most of them, I managed to procure enough time to where there was only around approximate 20 or so seconds before I thought Minato-senpai would appear. Kazuo said before his poker face cracked slightly. It showed his stress as he talked about the situation, however his fierce look told the story that he wouldn't bow down to the stress and would move on quickly. This was an act from Kazuo. He was indeed under immense stress at facing both of Konoha's old foxes at the same time, however he had good enough control to keep up the poker face if he wanted to. I need to take more credit, even more, Kazuo thought as he continued his speech. Using the body flicker jutsu, I jumped high into the air after seeing the enemy making hand seals, and as they were Wadikure ninjas, I determined that the most likely path for the danger to come from was the ground. Once in the air, I used the explosion tags that I had saved. Once I figured out about the enemy ninja, I made a large makeshift explosion ball of sorts which I used to defeat a decent amount of ninjas. I was going to use this as both a distraction as well as a means to create an escape if Minato Namikaze didn't show up on time. However, before I even hit the ground, Minato Namikaze did show up, and the rest can be given in report form from him, Kazuo said as he finished his report and gave a bow toward the two high-ranking officials of the Leaf, before straightening up his body once again and having his expression change. Now it clearly displayed the stress and uneasiness that Kazuo was feeling. I would also like to add on that the idea of saving Noera-rin was mine, and I take full responsibility for that choice. I felt like making someone sacrifice a Leaf comrade for a mission wasn't what the village was made for. I stand by this decision of mine. Chapter 62, Silence engulfed the office for a brief moment before Kakashi spoke up. I was the captain of the team. I decided to follow Kazuo's suggestion. It is my responsibility to bear the aftermath of it, Kakashi said as he took a step forward. Danzo's face had scrunched up slightly as he looked at the two young shinobi. Hiruzen finally changed his blank expression. His lips curled upwards as he gave Kazuo a smile that almost seemed to reflect sadness. I am glad to see that we have shinobi who follow the ideals of the first Hokage. What happened on the battlefield to Obito Uchiha was a misfortunate event, however you made the right choice and am sure he too would agree to my words, Hiruzen said as he got up from his chair. Did I become a potential chess piece in his eyes? Kazuo wondered inside as he watched the man come to stand in front of him and pat his shoulder. What you did was what every shinobi in the Leaf should do. You are doing the mission for your village, for your comrades, so that you can keep them safe. The life of someone like that is always more important. I am very pleased with your choice, Chunin Kazuo, Hiruzen said, giving Kazuo a soft pat on the shoulder. Kazuo's expression changed as he looked at the man. It clearly showed the hesitance and pain that he was experiencing as well as the relief at hearing those words. Of course, it was all fake. Kazuo, however, had replicated it to such a perfection that no one would be able to notice. The combination of having B rank on both intelligence and charisma allowed for Kazuo to become one of the best actors to exist. Thank you, Lord Hokage, Kazuo said as he lifted his head, which he had lowered in shame, to gaze at the man, his eyes shining as if clearly displaying the newly ignited hope that Hiruzen had instilled in him. Seeing his reaction, Hiruzen nodded his head, the smile still on his lips, clearly pleased at Kazuo's reaction. With that, the entire report is finished, Minato Namikaze interjected as he said politely. I see, the others besides Minato are dismissed. Make sure to take a good rest. Nodding their heads, the three kids, Kazuo included, gave their goodbyes politely before excusing themselves out of the office. Once outside, the expressions of Kakashi and Rin immediately got much worse. It was clear that as every second passed, the death of Obito was only becoming more real, more tangible than it had been, his missing presence growing larger in their minds. It was at this moment that Kakashi turned to face Kazuo. You had no need to do that. It was only right, it was my suggestion, and I have to stand by what I did. If there is anyone was to suffer for that decision, then it is me, Kazuo said as he gave the gray-haired kid a small smile. Kakashi merely looked at him for a moment before nodding his head, muttering a single word. Thank you. Kazuo didn't respond, merely giving both him and Noera-rin a wave and heading toward the stairs. It was at this moment that he heard Kakashi say something else. Something quite pleasing to hear. You completed the mission. I'll make sure Minato-sensei makes it so that you get the appropriate recognition and rewards. It's all for the village, Kazuo replied as his figure disappeared from view. Inside the Hokage office, the three men had yet to utter a single word. They had been clearly listening to the conversation right outside of the office door. "That kid's got a good heart," Hiruzen uttered as he took out a smoking pipe and lit it up before taking a slow puff of the tobacco. "He does. He's been quite the center of attention recently. Let's hope that this doesn't affect him badly," Minato replied with a smile as he thought back to the kid who he had met inside a commander's tent in the front lines. "He's suspicious," Danzo said as he gave a light sneer. His words caused Minato and Hiruzen to turn their heads to face the man. "His records show nothing of his combat prowess or his intelligence. It's quite similar to an undercover spy," Danzo said. "Do you think I wouldn't have already searched his background thoroughly before allowing him to head into such an important mission, Danzo?" Hiruzen asked as his eyes narrowed. His aura immediately flared up as he looked at the man who had practically challenged his intelligence. Danzo immediately took a step back before stopping himself. "I'm just telling my own observations." Hiruzen turned his head away from the man to face Minato once more. "It is suspicious how he managed to pass through his entire life until now hidden, his talents undiscovered by either the academy or the orphanage. That's why, as a last measure of probing, I'll be putting him under your direct command, Minato," Hiruzen said as he took another puff of the tobacco, releasing it out and filling the room with its smoky fragrance. Minato nodded his head immediately, his expression serious as he faced the Hokage. "Yes, sir. I'll make sure to keep a close eye on him, and if he isn't what Danzo suspects him to be, then I'll raise him to be a pillar of the village," Minato announced. "That would be preferable. Now on to other matters," Hiruzen said, changing the direction of the conversation. Outside of the Hokage Tower, Kazuo channeled his chakra and instantly disappeared. Using the body flicker jutsu, Kazuo arrived at his rundown apartment and headed inside. It was time for a good rest. The last 2 days hadn't been easy on his mind or body. His expression, however, didn't show tiredness. In fact, it displayed a smile. "Closer. I've managed to get closer to the Hokage faction, even if only slightly. With this, my chances of rising higher are increased tremendously. Soon enough, I'll manage to get my hands on that A-rank library," Kazuo thought. Chapter 63. He lay down on the broken bed after closing the door using the kunai method that he had practically mastered after doing it for so many times. Kazuo opened his mission menu. There was still one last reward that had yet to be claimed, and sure enough, immediately a pop-up appeared before him. He had ignored it during the stress of the moment, however now it was time for him to see. A random hidden A-rank jutsu. Kazuo thought as he read the pop-up up in front of him. User has gained 1 random hidden A-rank jutsu. Ding! User has gained the Paper Person of God technique. Kazuo's eyes immediately widened. He knew this jutsu. It was at that moment that the expected headache came, however this time, it was much worse. It was so much information that he felt like his head was about to burst open. It continued for around 3 minutes before Kazuo felt the headache subside and give him clarity once more. Paper Person of God technique is a jutsu created by Konin of the Akatsuki to be used specifically against Madara Uchiha, who is in actuality a Bito Uchiha in disguise. The jutsu relies heavily on an extreme quantity of explosion tags, which is a huge limiter for me even if you do not take into account the amount of chakra needed to use all of those explosion tags at the same time or the amount of preparation needed to launch the jutsu. Kazuo thought, however, contrary to these thoughts, Kazuo had a wide smile on his face. In fact, he felt excited enough that he wanted to head to Training Ground 1 immediately. The useful part of this jutsu is the fact that it gives me the knowledge on how to perfectly camouflage my paper jutsu as well as explosion tags. It is such sophisticated camouflage that even the Manjikyu Sharingan of Obshio couldn't notice the hidden explosion tags. Kazuo thought to himself before quickly getting up from his bed and heading to a small drawer on the other side of the room, inside of which large stacks of white paper were stored. Taking out one paper sheet, Kazuo immediately performed his first paper jutsu. The white paper converged into itself and it continued folding upon itself until what remained in Kazuo's hand was no longer a large sheet of paper but rather a white paper shuriken. Now, let's see. Kazuo thought as he tried replicating only a small part of the paper god technique. Thankfully, he had used and even researched the paper shuriken technique for a while, and he was now able to at least manage this much. With all of the information inside his head, Kazuo performed it. The shuriken in his hand disappeared. It was as if it had folded into the air itself, however Kazuo could still clearly feel the light weight in his palm. With this, my ranged attacks have become much more deadly, however, it will still be useless against a Hyuga or Uchiha sadly. Kazuo thought as he released a shallow sigh. The smile on his face didn't droop, however. The paper shurikens still carry traces of chakra which can be seen by dojutsu users, however to everyone else, they won't be visible unless they are some extreme type of chakra sensors. Kazuo thought as he shifted his hand, made a proper shuriken jutsu stance and threw the invisible shuriken toward his wall. Thunk! A tearing sound after, Kazuo saw the wall pierced and the camouflage over the shuriken failing as it reappeared before his eyes. Good, this is good enough for now. Next in line is to completely master the jutsu that I stole from the library. Kazuo thought as his mind went back to the large amount of jutsu he had stolen from the B-rank ninja library. That will sadly have to wait until tomorrow. Kazuo thought as he headed back to his bed. His eyes already felt heavy, sleep was going to be quick. And it was, as always, however it wasn't a peaceful embrace. Running through a forest, hundreds of ninjas behind him, death occurring over and over only for it to be overcome and then for Kazuo to find himself inside a jail cell. Danzo's face sneered at him as what appeared to be a Yamanaka came closer, just as the man's hand was about to touch Kazuo's head. The dream shattered and Kazuo woke up. Huff huff. Releasing harsh breaths, Kazuo quickly calmed himself down and lifted his body up from the broken bed. It had become a usual routine. The dream had been rougher than usual, however still within expectations. Eating his morning breakfast quickly, Kazuo headed toward the door, his next destination. Training Ground 1, or at least it was supposed to be Training Ground 1. As soon as Kazuo opened the door, he found Minato with Kakashi and Rin standing behind their sensei. Minato's hand was held up as if he was just about to knock. Hello? Minato-senpai, what brings you here? Kazuo questioned as he looked at the yellow-haired man. Minato gave an awkward smile as gave a light wave. Hello Kazuo, we came here to tell you that the Hokage has assigned you to Team 7 permanently. You were supposed to be told later this week, however we decided to do some training and I wondered if you wanted to join in? Minato said as he lifted his hand and rubbed the back of his head. Kazuo felt like the world had turned upside down. Me? Team 7? What is that old bag of bones thinking? Was my impression that good? No, there's no way it was good enough to warrant this, however, if you think about this from another perspective. Kazuo thought as he gave Minato an excited nod. Okay Minato-sensei, just give me a moment please, Kazuo said as he turned around and headed inside quickly. It wasn't that he needed to prepare, he already was prepared for training. He simply wanted a brief moment to sort his thoughts. He's using Minato as both a reward as well as a way to closely monitor me. When compared to Shikaru, who couldn't keep an eye on me at all times, Minato's much more dangerous. Kazuo thought as he felt an incoming headache. Chapter 64, Releasing a long-winded sigh, Kazuo turned around and headed to the door before swinging it open. Am ready Minato-senpai, or should I call you sensei now? Kazuo said as he gave Minato his shining fanboy eyes. It clearly made the man uncomfortable, however, it was a good way to increase his familiarity in Minato's eyes as well. Or he might just as well be faking his expression entirely, it is quite likely at that. A shinobi like him becoming uncomfortable that easily? Yeah, quite hard to believe. Kazuo thought as he gave the trio in front of him a soft smile. Minato returned it with a twitching smile of his own before nodding his head. Alright Kazuo, then let's get going. Immediately after, the four shinobi used the body flicker jutsu to disappear from their location. Even though they were moving at high speeds, it was still clear. The difference between Minato Namikaze and Kazuo. I've already mastered the body flicker, however his speed is much higher than mine, so it's clear that he is holding back. Does it relate to his overall physical status? Kazuo wondered as he gazed at Kakashi, who was slightly behind him, and Rin, who was clearly lagging behind the others. She still needs hand signs to perform the jutsu. Kakashi doesn't, however his mastery is still ways away from actual mastery. Kazuo thought as the scenery around them quickly changed. From the bustling streets of the hidden village to a green forest filled with trees. It was at this moment that Minato jumped into a clearing in the middle of his forest. A moment later Kazuo landed behind him, followed by Kakashi and lastly nowhere Rin. Turning around, Minato gave Kazuo a soft smile as he said, "This is Training Ground 7, it has been reserved for us for around a week. It is one of the safer training grounds when compared to others around the village, thus it is mainly used by newly graduated Gennin teams. Specifically Team 7. Minato said as he explained whilst motioning to their surroundings with one hand. Nodding his head, Kazuo replied, "I see, it's much better than the training ground one which I usually use, that one has barely any privacy at all," Kazuo said as he rubbed his cheek. Kazuo had been trying to increase the amount of body language used during his acting, this way he could pose as a more believable 13-year-old who was completely loyal to the village. The action could be as small as rubbing his cheek to display slight nervousness or scratching the back of his head to look embarrassed. It was small actions like these that made an actor. Now then, how about we start this with a spar to get us started? And I also need to gauge at just what level you are, Kazuo," Minato said with a smile as he turned toward Kakashi. "What do you think, Kakashi?" Hatake Kakashi, the young gray-haired ninja, simply nodded his head, no words leaving his mouth, though Kazuo wouldn't have been able to notice the movement of his mouth even if he had spoken, it being covered by a mask. "What about you, Kazuo?" Minato questioned as he turned his gaze towards him. Nodding his head quickly, Kazuo appeared excited as he replied, "I would be more than happy to. I haven't really had a lot of sparring partners before, and I wanted to see just how strong Kakashi was too," Kazuo said, his voice light as he turned toward Kakashi. Rin quickly made distance as she backpedaled to their cut tree stumps and sat down on the grass. "Alright then, I'll be here to stop you if anything dangerous occurs. No lethal moves are allowed, besides that everything else is," Minato said as he held up his left hand. Kakashi and Kazuo immediately changed their stances. Both twisted their bodies as they entered their combat stance. Immediately a large disparity was noticed. Kakashi had a completely unknown stance to Kazuo, while Kazuo's basic academy taijutsu stance was completely clear in front of Kakashi's eyes. "I can't use my explosion tags, and even if I could, it's a waste to use them against Kakashi in a spar," Kazuo thought as his eyes grew focused. A glint appeared in them for a brief moment before Minato's raised hand fell down and the sparring match officially began. FSH. FSHH. Immediately, both of the young shinobi created distance with one another using the body flicker jutsu. The short distance of only a few meters had now widened to over 30. Instantly, as soon as Kazuo stopped the body flicker, his hand moved toward his ninja bag and he quickly took out 4 shuriken which he threw toward Kakashi. Their aim was perfect, however none of them hit the target. Kakashi had taken his short sword out and made a swirling motion, quickly stopping every single shuriken and rebounding them back toward the ground. It won't be easy, Kazuo thought as he saw Kakashi quickly making hand signs. The speed of their execution was clearly leagues above his own. The jutsu was completed in less than a second. Immediately, Kazuo saw the ground before him start to extend. He knew this jutsu very well. He had already died from it after all. Without using any hand signs, Kazuo quickly performed the substitution jutsu and replaced himself with a log that he found nearby. Puff-thunk. With the release of smoke, the stone spears that should have pierced Kazuo's body instead went through a log of wood. Kazuo didn't hesitate for a moment as he made a single tiger hand seal. Puff. A clone appeared instantly and ran toward Kakashi, hoping to divert his attention whilst Kazuo headed underground using the hiding like a mole technique. Kakashi, who was on the other side of the field, saw Kazuo charging toward him. Immediately he changed his posture and ran toward Kazuo as well, his short sword in his hand. The shadow clone had a kunai in his hand, and a moment later the blades of their weapons clashed. Clang! Chapter 65. A moment later, the blades of the kunai clashed. Asterisk clang. Asterisk. With a loud resounding sound and sparks flying up in the air, the two kunai battled against each other. Kakashi and Kazuo's shadow clone trying to come out on top. However, it was quickly decided that Kazuo was in no way near close to Kakashi's physical abilities, much less his shadow clone. Puff! With a cloud of smoke, the shadow clone dispersed. However, it had done its job. Kazuo appeared under Kakashi and quickly dragged him under the ground, leaving only his head exposed, and in the next moment, Kazuo rose above the ground and took out a kunai and directed it toward Kakashi. It was at this moment that he felt another sensation, however. A cold blade pointed, touching the back of his neck. I lose? Kazuo thought, bewildered, as he dropped his own kunai and watched the Kakashi in front of him that had been dragged into the ground explode in a puff of white smoke. Turning his head around, Kazuo saw the real Kakashi. His face didn't have a single bead of sweat and he looked as calm as ever. Match over, Kakashi wins, Minato said as he raised his hand up, officially ending the sparring match. You are bad, Kakashi said before turning around toward Minato. Looking at the kid in front of him, Kazuo felt the urge to slap an explosion tag on Kakashi's face and be done with it. I think it's because you were holding back too much, Kazuo, Minato said as he came closer to the two. His words caused Rin's and Kakashi's eyes to widen slightly. Holding back? Kakashi questioned as he turned to face Kazuo. Kazuo merely nodded his head, a somber expression on his face. It's not that I was holding back, but rather that I couldn't use most of my arsenal, Kazuo replied as he looked toward Minato. I learned how to fight on the battlefield. Every single moment out there I thought of how I could cut a Cloud or IWA ninja jugular out and make them bleed to death. When killing someone is off the table, it's quite hard, Kazuo said as he explained his reasoning to Minato. This was as a way for him to camouflage the fact that he hadn't been using even 20% of his jutsu arsenal. He couldn't explain how he knew them after all. And it was clear that Minato would be able to learn that he wasn't using his all pretty quickly, even if he didn't know that Kazuo had other jutsu. The reason for it was simple. When you knew a jutsu or had a way to come out of a certain battle situation, the body of a ninja which was trained to be ready for battle at all times would make certain twitches and give out certain signs that it wanted and knew how to counterattack. Even Kazuo couldn't control these signs that his body gave out completely, and so he had decided to simply make a reason as to why his body was reacting in a certain way when Minato questioned him about it. I see, that makes sense, Kakashi replied, his voice stoic as well and his words clearly awkward. However, Kakashi didn't seem to care one bit about them. Alright, I have a decent grip on your strength even without the use of deadly force. There is a clear inefficiency in your fighting style right now, Kazuo, that we must quickly patch up before it becomes a much larger problem, Minato said as he hummed out loud. An inefficiency? Are you talking about my taijutsu? Kazuo asked as he looked at the man seriously. That's right, so you already knew about it? Minato questioned as he replied to Kazuo's question. Yeah, I simply had no other taijutsu style to learn, and the battlefield didn't give me enough time to create an entirely new one from scratch either, Kazuo said as he shook his head, his body portraying a sense of sadness at his inability. It's alright, I'll teach you a suitable taijutsu style, Minato said as his lips curled up and he gave a bright smile toward Kazuo. Immediately the very next moment, Kazuo's attitude changed dramatically. His sadness was gone and replaced by his Minato fanboy persona that he used around the man. Immediately, Minato felt like taking back his words, however he simply kept his smile, although it was awfully clear that it was becoming less true by the second. This much should simply allow me to get closer to him and not annoy or push him away, Kazuo thought before he removed his act and instead simply kept an excited look as he gazed at Minato Namikaze. So what style will I be learning, sensei? Kazuo questioned, causing both Kakashi and Rin, who had gotten up from the ground and come to stand next to the two boys, to turn their heads toward Minato as well and await his answer. There are a lot of fighting styles that are good, however, they each have their benefits. Something like the strong fist style is specialized in pure brute strength, whilst the agile fist style is centered around the ability to maneuver around the opponent and to reach speeds where the enemy won't be able to touch or stop you. Minato said as he raised up 2 fingers. Of course, there are also styles that are made of the combination of these 2 principles, however they have a lower limit in terms of growth. And as the saying goes, it's better to be a master of one rather than being good in all but master in none. Minato said as he raised his 3rd finger. Finally, the man concluded his short lecture with a question for Kazuo. So which one do you want to learn, Kazuo? For a moment Kazuo remained silent, his face clearly looking focused as he thought about the question. Finally, almost a whole minute later, Kazuo raised his head and looked at Minato. His lips curled upward and Minato felt an increasingly bad premotion. I want to learn Minato-senpai's fighting style, please teach me, sensei. Chapter 66. I want to learn Minato Synopsis' taijutsu style. Please teach me, sensei. Kazuo said as his expression clearly depicted the look of an eternal fanboy for the man. Silence engulfed the surroundings as Minato, Rin, and Kakashi turned to look at him. A moment later, Minato brought his hand to the back of his head and gave an awkward smile. I'm not sure if my fighting style is suited for you, Kazuo. If it is, then I would be more than happy to teach it to you. How about we try a couple and find which one suits you the best? Minato said as he looked at Kazuo awkwardly. Immediately after, he saw Kazuo's expression twist and become one that looked like a kicked puppy that had just had its dream shattered. Alright, let's do it, sensei, Kazuo said as he walked to Minato, whose expression calmed down, and instead of the awkward expression, a serious one appeared. This is very important. You could say that it will even dictate your life and death in the future. If you use a taijutsu style that isn't suited to you and your body, then the balance in your combat will be completely ruined and you will create a large weakness in your fighting style, Minato explained as he started going through a set of taijutsu katas. Looking at the movements, Kazuo immediately noticed the changes between it and the academy style. The academy taijutsu that he had been using until now had a focus on complete balance, both in defending, attacking, speed, and maneuvering around the battlefield, whilst the style in front of him that Minato Namikaze was showing displayed a clear focus on attack, disregarding defense, and maneuverability to increase the attack power and the speed of the strikes to the maximum. This is the strong fist style. It's a style that completely focuses on attacking the opponent. I've heard practitioners of this style say that the best defense was attacking. If your opponent is completely overwhelmed, then they wouldn't find any time to attack you, and thus your own defense would be good enough. Minato said that before he stopped going through the movements, he had changed into a different set of kata. This time, the movements were less quick and the force was obviously reduced, however the maneuverability that it gave was on a completely different level. It also sacrificed a lot of attacking instead of opting for a stance that ensured a higher level of defense. This is called the soft fist. It opts for high maneuverability as well as defense whilst lacking in extreme strength and speed, Minato said before stopping the katas altogether and turning toward Kazuo. I'll show you my taijutsu, however it is unlikely to be suitable for you, Kazuo. You would need a reaction speed much higher than the usual shinobi as well as having a body structure that is suited toward maximum speed, Minato said before starting the katas. Kazuo's, Kakashi's, and even Rin's eyes widened as they looked at the man performing his taijutsu style in front of them. They could barely see the strikes. No, they couldn't see all of them. They were merely seeing them because Minato had lowered his speed to a level where the 3 of them would be able to glean some information from the taijutsu style. It's either this or the strong fist, Kazuo thought as he looked at Minato before his lips curled upward even further than they had been. Why not both? Kazuo thought as he raised his voice, talking to Minato, who had completed the full set of katas, and turned toward them. Even though the man had shown 3 different taijutsu katas, he didn't have a single drop of sweat on his body, looking completely unfazed as he faced them. Just how high are this guy's physical attributes, and he doesn't even look the part? Kazuo thought before saying, I want to learn your style, sensei. I think I have a good reaction speed, and even then I can always give up on it if I'm unsuited towards it, right? The other style I thought would suit me was the strong fist, Kazuo said as he looked at Minato, his eyes turning shiny as he tried to portray the look of a hopeful kohai who looked up to his sensei. Sigh. Minato released a soft sigh before nodding his head. Alright, let's get started right away then, Rin. you and Kakashi have a couple of sparring matches whilst I teach Kazuo here the basics. After we're done, then we will do some team exercises to increase the fluidity of our cooperation whilst in combat," Minato said, causing both Noura-Rin and Hatake Kakashi to nod their heads and head off to a more remote part of the training ground. Minato turned toward Kazuo and nodded before starting the katas once more. This time, however, his speed was slow, as he was simply showing Kazuo how to move instead of how much speed the style could show. After around a quarter of an hour, Kazuo finally memorized the entire kata from start to finish and started doing them on his own. Minato simply stood to the side and corrected his stances when he noticed if anything was wrong. "Alright, you have a basic understanding of the kata, now it is time to see if you really are suited to the style," Minato announced as he looked at Kazuo, who turned toward him and gave him a questioning look. "Continue doing the kata," Minato said instead, without giving any information on what the test would be. Bang! With a quick punch, Minato slammed his fist into Kazuo's face, causing him to be thrown back more than a couple of meters away. "You aren't suited toward it," Minato said instantly. "What?" Kazuo thought before his brain quickly understood the reason. "However, I already knew that my reaction time wasn't the fastest. The thing is, Minato-senpai, I can simply cheat in any situation." Kazuo thought before sending chakra directly into his brain and killing himself immediately. Thump! His body fell onto the floor. Minato, who saw this, had a confused look on his face. The confusion didn't last long when he sensed Kazuo's chakra start dispersing. He was dead. "What?" Minato practically screamed as he rushed towards him, however it was much too late. Chapter 67, Inside an old apartment inside the Hidden Leaf Village. A 13-year-old boy snapped his eyes open. It was Kazuo, who had just turned back time. "The reason why I want Minato's fighting style is simply that I can be said to have the best reaction speed in the entire world. After all, I can simply turn back time and react before the opponent even makes their move. It's a fighting style that's entirely suited to my power. If only it was possible to turn back time slightly and not a whole day backward," Kazuo thought as he released a sigh after his thoughts reached the end. Getting up from his bed, he quickly ate breakfast and got ready, waiting for when Minato and the rest of Team 7 would come and get him. Minutes later, the three of them did come. Kazuo followed every action that he had done during his previous turn completely, all the way until his sparring match with Kakashi. Unfortunately, it still ended in a failure. He did manage to draw out the match for a few more moments, however the ending result was still a loss. This was where the changes began. "Follow my movements, Kazuo," Minato said as he showed a slowed-down version of his kata. Kazuo didn't move, simply acting as if he was closely looking at the man's movements. After Minato finished an entire set of kata, he stopped and motioned for Kazuo to try. Nodding his own head, Kazuo's lips curled slightly upwards before he started doing the kata. Swish swing FSHH. In a moment, Kazuo completely replicated the man's taijutsu kata. It was still at the beginner level, however, in Minato's eyes. Kazuo had simply glanced at the kata once and managed to completely replicate them. His eyes widened slightly. Minato continued watching Kazuo in silence until he completed a full set. "Alright, continue the kata. I will be testing to see if you are suited to the fighting style," Minato said as he motioned with his head for Kazuo to continue. The reason why he told me that the test had started was both to disrupt my concentration as well as to occupy my mind on the question of what the test actually was. It was at this moment, as these thoughts passed through his test, that Kazuo noticed Minato's shoulder moving slightly. Immediately changing the kata he was doing, Kazuo performed a dodge to the right whilst launching his own counterattack toward Minato with his right arm. He hadn't even seen the punch at all, however he had to act before it happened, otherwise there would be no way for him to dodge. Thankfully, it seemed his actions had been right. Minato caught the punch that he had thrown with his right hand whilst his left punch was next to Kazuo's face, merely a few centimeters from hitting the mark. A soft smile appeared on his face. "It seems like you are suited to it," Minato said, his voice sounding light as if the man was happy that he would be able to teach Kazuo his own taijutsu style. Kazuo immediately changed his expression at that moment, his facial expression becoming one of unbridled joy as he practically jumped on the balls of his feet. However, contrary to his outward excitement, Kazuo's mind was stone cold and completely calm from all kinds of emotions. Good, now then all I have to do is continue with this learning speed. Kazuo thought, and whilst the idea of using the time loop to completely master the fighting style on the first day did pass through his mind, he didn't actually do it. I'll be doing multiple time loops during this week that Team 7 has as a vacation to make it look like I'm talented, but at the same time not make it look as if I'm too strong immediately. The reason being, Minato isn't actually fully trusting in me yet, and he probably won't be for a while. Kazuo thought whilst he kept his outward joy. Time continued on, with the days passing. For everyone besides Kazuo, for days had passed and it was now the end of the week. Tomorrow, Team 7 will be back in action once more. For Kazuo, however, time had passed quite differently. 72 days. Kazuo thought as he stood seated on a patch of grass next to a large boulder in Training Ground 7. Status Kazuo thought before the air shimmered for a moment and a holographic screen appeared in front of him. Stats. Name, Kazuo. Race, human. Age, 13. Affiliation, Hidden Leaf Village, Gennin. Strength, C. Endurance, C. Agility, C. Intelligence, B. Charisma, B. Chakra, C. Strength has been improved slightly, and is finally firmly in the Gennin rank. Chakra has similarly developed, it's mostly likely caused by my continued training during these 5 days as well as the bloodline activation. Kazuo thought before opening the skills menu. His jutsu hadn't seen any increases besides shadow clones as well as the addition of 2-year skills. Shadow clone jutsu, 8 out of 10. It was a fairly easy jutsu to master. Bringing down the chakra loss during each clone creation had also been fairly easy considering he had already done it with his Academy clone technique. Namikaze, Ultra 2 Swift Swirling Reflex Taijutsu, 7 out of 10. Why the hell does that guy have to name his jutsu and even taijutsu like this? Why is the system even following his naming sense? Kazuo thought to himself as he stared at the overtly long name for what was simply a taijutsu style. Sigh. And finally, the last addition to his skills had been combination jutsu. Enhanced Electric Water Bullet, 6 out of 10. It was a combination of jutsu that Minato had trained him and Kakashi on. Its power was several-fold the base power of the jutsu that Kakashi and Kazuo used individually. That had been all of his gains during these 72 days, or should they be called 5 days? Chapter 68. It was finally time for the new Team 7 to get back into the Konoha military rooster and begin taking missions once more. Minato stood before the 3 young ninjas who could have even been called kids if they had been mere civilians. Today was the last day of our training. Everyone has done well, especially you, Kazuo. We have managed to get back in top form and our teamwork should be more than efficient enough. Go home and take a good rest. Meet me before the Hokage Tower at 6 in the morning tomorrow. Minato said with a light smile before vanishing by using his Flying Thunder God Jutsu. Fuck, I want that. Kazuo thought to himself for a moment before turning toward the 2 young ninjas. Giving them both a soft smile, with his eyes seeming to radiate like stars, Kazuo asked the 2. You guys want to come with me for some ramen? My treat. Kazuo said, his voice melodious and appealing as he faced the 2 ninja kids. Sure, Rin said almost instantly before Kakashi nodded his head a moment later. Good, if it was last week, they wouldn't have been so easily swayed. Kazuo thought as his lips curled slightly more upwards before the 3 of them started walking in the direction of the Konoha village. Currently they were still in Training Ground 7, it didn't take long to reach the village however, merely around 15 minutes of walking normally. This way, it'll have more time to talk to them, it's much better than simply all of us using the body flicker. Kazuo thought as he continued to make small talk with Rin whilst incorporating Kakashi into their conversation here and there, though it wasn't easy with how little Kakashi talked. Finally, the 3 arrived at a ramen stand. The sounds inside the stand, which was hidden with some cloth flaps with Ichiraka written on them in white, were loud and boisterous. Their voice sounded like it came from a young female, and sure enough, as soon as the trio came inside, they saw the cause. It was their sensei together with a red-haired woman. Kushina Uzumaki, what great timing! Kazuo thought as his lips could barely hold the joy he was feeling at bay, causing them to twitch. Minato-sensei? Rin and Kazuo said practically at the same time. This caused both Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki to stop and turn around toward the newcomers in the stall. Oh hey Rin, how've you been? The red-haired woman said as she immediately dragged the young girl into a hug. I've been well, Kushina-san, Rin replied awkwardly. You guys came here to eat ramen too? Minato questioned as a way to get the conversation rolling. Yeah, Kazuo wanted to treat us to a meal. Kakashi replied with a low voice while staying as far away from the red-haired woman as he could. Kazuo? Kushina said with a questioning tone as she turned to look at Kazuo. He had black hair that had grown slightly longer and now reached just past his shoulders, and black eyes that seemed to engulf the light around them, and a face so white that it looked like he had never seen the light of the sun. If it hadn't been for the light scars on his arms and around his neck and face, Kazuo would have looked just like a porcelain doll. Are you a Uchiha? Kushina questioned immediately, without even hesitating for a moment. It was usually rude to ask someone about their family before even introducing themselves, however it looked like the woman didn't give a damn. No ma'am, I'm a civilian orphan, Kazuo replied politely as he shook his head. Don't get on her bad side, this woman is a devil. Kazuo thought as he tried to hold himself in a pose as if he was an innocent child. It was however unsuccessful. How could it be when the woman could sense emotions? Cold, no it's not cold, they aren't exactly negative. Kushina thought as she looked at the kid before her. Disdain? No. It's too confusing. Kushina thought before furrowing her brows lightly and turning around, choosing to ignore the kid. Emotion sense? Kazuo immediately thought as he thought back to how Kushina usually acted and her normal personality, and then to her reaction right at this moment. I fucked up. Kazuo thought before releasing a sigh. So you sense my emotions, right? Kazuo opened his mouth and said, his demeanor changed immediately, his voice growing cold and disdainful. This immediately caused all four ninjas to turn toward Kazuo. How did you know? Kushina questioned as her brows furrowed even further. I just did, Kazuo said before turning around and sitting down. This turn was already fucked, so he wouldn't mind talking with Kushina and Minato for a while before resetting the time once more. What did you sense my emotions as? I'm quite curious. Kazuo asked as he lifted his hand and brought the cook's attention toward himself. Bring me a bowl of beef ramen. Coming in a moment. The cook replied before turning around again. The atmosphere had grown cold, both Minato and Kushina were practically glaring at Kazuo. A spy? It doesn't make sense for you to be one and say that, however. How did you find out? Kushina questioned, her voice cold so unlike what it had been merely seconds ago. You're the only Uzumaki in the village, the only people who can hold a tailed beast are Uzumaki, at least the only ones who can hold the 9 tails without becoming monsters themselves and losing their minds, Kazuo said before turning to face Minato and Kushina once again. That's the lie, do you want to hear the truth? Kazuo said with a light smile. Sure, Minato said, his hand was already close to his ninja bag, ready to stop and intercept any movement from Kazuo. I come from a different world and you all are just fictional characters, Kazuo said, watching as the others' faces turned into confusion before he used his chakra to once more overload his brain with chakra and instantly kill himself. Bang! His head fell on the counter, his body going limp. The confusion on the ninjas' faces only increased. Kazuo once more woke up back inside his broken apartment. Letting the truth out sometimes is quite therapeutic. Chapter 69. Immediately Kazuo got up from the bed, plans already swirling inside his mind as he tried to come up with his next actions. I can either follow the last turn's route and try to hide my emotions somehow, or I could simply not go to Ichiraku. Kazuo thought, standing still for a few moments until he finally came to a decision. I'll try a few more times. I won't be able to show her emotions like happiness or others of the sort. I simply can't fake them that deeply at my current skill level, however being close to emotionless should be possible. Kazuo thought before nodding to himself and getting out of his small rundown apartment. The day flowed through similarly to how it had during the previous turn, and finally he, Kakashi, and Rin arrived at Ichiraku Ramen once more. Heading inside, they were once more met with the scene of Minato and Kushina bickering with each other. "Hello, sensei," Kazuo said as he as well as Kakashi and Rin sat down. "Hey!" Minato immediately raised his hand as if he had been saved from the depths of the ocean, his eyes lighting up once he saw his students. Kushina Uzumaki turned around and immediately dragged Rin into her embrace once more before finally turning her attention toward Kazuo once again. "Hello, my name's Kazuo. I'm Minato-sensei's new student," Kazuo said as he raised his hand in a small wave. "Hello," Kushina said, her voice carrying her excitement this time. "Are you a Uchiha?" Kushina immediately asked afterward. "No, I'm a civilian ninja, ma'am," Kazuo replied, his face remaining a soft smile. "Ah, you look just like one, you know?" Kushina said as she raised her hand, and in a fierce and swift movement, Kazuo's cheeks started hurting. Immediately his brows furrowed as he tried moving away, however he found out that the woman was what philosophers would call an unstoppable force. "You're so cute," Kushina immediately gushed for a few moments before Minato carefully removed her hand from Kazuo's face. His cheek was already red, however, Kazuo had to remain calm. His emotions remained blank, as if whatever Kushina did, she didn't do to him. It was an emotional detachment of sorts from his own body. She could only sense negative emotions. I figured as much, however this practically confirms it. She wouldn't be so joyous if she noticed that I have no emotions at all. Kazuo thought as he and the group finally turned around and continued their meal. Finishing his beef ramen, Kazuo stood up and turned toward the group. "If I may excuse myself, I wanted to go back and rest for a while." "It was great meeting you, Kushina-san," Kazuo said as he gave a light bow to the group. "All right, make sure to rest well, Kazuo. We have a mission tomorrow," Minato said as he and the group gave him a light wave of their hands, besides Kakashi, of course, who has always looked like he was stuck inside his own head. It had only gotten worse with the death of Obito. Heading out of the Ichiraku stall, Kazuo started heading back toward his own apartment. "I've formed a shallow connection with Kushina. I'll at least be remembered as Minato's student. All that is left from here is to increase these connections even further until they consider me a true comrade," Kazuo thought as he walked down the streets. Looking through the densely packed roads, even though the night was approaching, Kazuo clearly noticed the changes. The war is coming to an end, Kazuo thought as he saw the faces of the people who had been so disheartened when he had first come back to the Leaf. They had now become joyous, and peace could be felt in their expressions. How can they be so carefree when they know their life could be ended in a split second? Even I could annihilate this entire civilian road in mere moments, not to mention Minato, Kazuo thought before a slight sneer appeared on his face. They know, however, they choose to ignore it, just so that they can continue to live their lives obliviously. Dumb fucks, Kazuo thought as he finally arrived at his apartment. Opening the door and setting up the lock with the kunai once he was inside again, Kazuo sat on his broken bed and took out a few paper sheets. During the 70 or so days that he had repeated, he had made sure to keep training and exploring his use of the paper jutsu. It hadn't given him an extra jutsu in the system, however his knowledge about the paper style had increased massively. Taking a paper, he held it between his index and middle finger whilst forming a hand sign. The paper immediately started floating up in the air and converging into itself. It soon took the form of a paper ball. However, it didn't look crumbled. In fact, it resembled an iron ball more than a paper one. I'm close to being able to get my first original jutsu, this time intentionally, Kazuo thought as his mind went back to the enhanced water bullet jutsu before shaking his head lightly. Sigh. It was hard. Conan had a much easier time than he did, but at the same time, he also had his own advantages. He had fully mastered jutsu, the paper shuriken, and the paper god technique that he could research. After much thought, he had come to his first jutsu idea. By making round, perfect paper balls that resembled the iron bullets of the flint-flock age, Kazuo could create a jutsu that shot out these bullets similarly to how a gun did. If this jutsu was perfected, it would most likely be an A-rank assassination jutsu. 3 hours later. That's enough for now, Kazuo thought as he hid the papers inside his wrist guards once more and fell asleep. Laying down on his bed, Kazuo's mind was calm. Unlike before when he was on the cloud battlefield, Kazuo was finally calm. The nightmares that ravaged his mind had long stopped. He had adapted to the war. Chapter 70. The hours passed and soon enough it was the next morning. The sun had yet to rise above the horizon when Kazuo woke up. After a few moments, he stood up from his bed and immediately started doing his taijutsu kata. It was a way of warming up in the morning as well as preparing his body so that it would be active enough to respond to any surprises that may happen. After around half an hour, Kazuo finished his preparations, went inside his bathroom, and took a shower before finishing up the rest of his morning activities and eating breakfast. It was now time to head to the Hokage Tower and meet up with the rest of Team 7. Opening his apartment door, Kazuo headed outside and immediately used the body flicker to disappear from view. His figure was already tens of meters away on a rooftop, running toward the meeting location. In less than a few minutes, Kazuo arrived at the location. FSHH. With the sound of the wind, Kazuo appeared on the ground. "You're here," a voice said. Turning around, Kazuo saw that it was Kakashi Hatake who had spoken. "Good morning, Kakashi," Kazuo said as he nodded his head toward the young boy. A quick nod of Kakashi's head later, silence once more engulfed the place as neither spoke a word whilst they waited for the remaining two members of the team. A minute or so later, Rin joined them, and finally, once the clock hit exactly 6 a.m. in the morning. FSH. With the wind being displaced, Minato Namikaze teleported before them. "I see that everyone's here. Let's head into the tower. We will be getting a mission directly by the Hokage," Minato said as he nodded toward the young ninjas and turned around, heading into the tower. The rest of Team 7 followed behind him. Moments later, the four of them were standing before Sarutobi Hiruzen. "The war is almost over, Minato," Hiruzen said, his voice sounding old and tired as he looked at the yellow flash. "You willing to give me some pointers, you old fox?" Kazuo thought to himself as he looked at the man performing an excellent act in front of his eyes. Minato gave a light nod of his head. The next words that Hiruzen said had a completely different tone. The kind and tired old man was gone in an instant and replaced by a battle-hardened shinobi god. The cloud, however, has yet to give up. "I want your team to head behind enemy lines and kill the main commander of their forces." Hiruzen said his eyes clearly showed that there was no room for disobedience. This order was absolute and it was going to be carried out no matter how many sacrifices were made. "Yes, sir," Minato directly responded. Hiruzen took out a completely black scroll from under his table and threw it toward Minato, who quickly caught it. Opening it up, Minato's eyes moved quickly before he closed the scroll and lit it up on fire with a single hand sign. "Dismissed. The mission starts now," Hiruzen said as he reclined back in his chair. Team 7 nodded immediately before heading out of the office and outside of the Hokage Tower immediately. "I'll explain the mission once we're outside of the village. Follow me," Minato said as he instantly used the body flicker jutsu. Kakashi, Kazuo, and Rin followed behind him at once. A few minutes later, the group was already at a distance from the Leaf Village. Minato finally lowered his speed, however he didn't stop, and then he began explaining the details of the mission. "We will be eliminating Arasoyatsuki. He is currently the lead commander at the front lines," Minato said before stopping for a moment and continuing. "We will first meet up with our frontline forces, more accurately with Shikaku Nara, who will help us in coming up with a more detailed plan on how to complete the assassination," Minato said, and then he stopped, not delving into any more details about the mission. It was clear that the three young ninjas didn't have enough of a rank to be privy to such details. Shikaku Nara, the clan leader of the Nara clan. Finally, a Nara that isn't against me. Kazuo thought for a moment as his mind wandered back to Shikaru, who had been quite the headache. I have no idea why we are coming to this mission. Cannon fodder? No, that wouldn't happen. Is it just to gain experience and so Minato asked for us to be part of the mission team? Kazuo thought, however, he couldn't come up with a clear reason. The group continued rushing towards their destination, their figures constantly flickering as they moved at immense speeds. Finally, after around 3 hours, Minato stopped. Place your hand on my back, we are close enough for me to teleport now. Nodding their heads, Kazuo, Kakashi, and Rin quickly placed their hand on Minato's back. A mere split second later, the group of 4 disappeared. FSH. With a flash, the 4 appeared inside of a large green tent. Looking around, Kazuo felt a sense of nostalgia. It has been quite a while since the last time that I was inside one of these. Kazuo thought, however, his feelings regarding the place weren't good. In fact, he had hoped to never be inside one of these tents again, though he knew that it was merely a disillusioned hope. Minato. A voice said, instantly gaining Kazuo's attention. It was a man with black hair tied in a spiky ponytail of sorts, wearing a green Jonin jacket. He had 2 scars on the right side of his face. What Kazuo was focused on, however, wasn't him. It was the man next to him, with an appearance that clearly showed the familial connection and similar spiky black hair. It was Shikaru Nara. Ah, I hate this world. Fuck Hiruzen and fuck you too. Kazuo thought as his left eye twitched slightly. Chapter 71. Kazuo's eyes were fixed on Shikaru for a few seconds before he removed his gaze only after the man gave a nod in acknowledgement, which he returned. Minato, you're here. Shikaku Nara said as he gave Minato a nod, who similarly returned it with a smile on his face. It's been a while, Shikaku. As much as I would love to have a nice chat, it seems we don't have a lot of time on our hands. Minato said as the smile on his face disappeared and his expression regained its serious look. That's right, Shikaku said before motioning for the group to come to the table where a large map of the surroundings was placed. Minato will be the head of this operation, and he will also be the one to assassinate Arisu Yatsuki. The 3 of you will be tasked with causing a large distraction whilst all of this happens. Even Minato will have a hard time infiltrating on his own. Shikaku said as his eyes turned to Kakashi, Kazuo, and Rin, who quickly nodded their heads. Nowhere Rin will be staying back, though not at the base. Her job is to wait out, and if anyone returns injured, then to heal them back so that they are at least able to run away. Shikaku said before pointing at a small clearing on the map, clearly showing Rin where she would be stationed at. A quick nod from the young Kunoichi later, Shikaku continued his explanation. I've seen that Kazuo has possibly the greatest affinity to the hiding like a mole technique in the entire Hidden Leaf Village. That was also the reason as to why I asked for him to come to this Mizaisen. Shikaku said as he turned to look at Kazuo. It was Shikaru, that fucker. Kazuo thought for a brief split second before nodding his head toward the commander. Yes, sir. Good, I like your confidence. Your job will be similar to your past escapades, Shikaru said as he pointed to a location encircled in red. Head to the edges of the enemy camp and plant as many explosion tags as you can before running away. At his words, Team 7's beside Kazuo's eyes widened. That. Rin, however, chose not to continue her words because she knew that she wouldn't be able to change anything. Kakashi's expression had dimmed Oswell whilst Minato's remained the same, clearly having more experience in holding a poker face than Kakashi did. I know that what we are asking you is practically a suicide mission, Kazuo, however currently you are the only one with the capabilities to do it. Shikaku said as he continued looking at Kazuo's expression. However, contrary to what he expected, Kazuo had a slight smile on his face as he nodded. It's alright, sir, if my acts can help in ending this miserable war in any way, then I will gladly do the mission. Kazuo said, his voice was tinged with a pang of sadness, however his conviction clearly shined through. Inside his mind, however, Kazuo's thoughts were drastically different. Fuck you, you fucking bastard, what do you mean that I'm the only one? You just mean to say that I'm the cheapest in the base, and you would rather sacrifice me alone rather than an entire team of Jonin. Kazuo thought to himself, however he didn't show any outward malice, in fact showing the complete opposite of his thoughts. Inwardly, however, he knew that what Shikaku had chosen was the correct decision. It was better to sacrifice a single Chunin. Good, next is you Kakashi, you will be stationed next to Noara Rin and protecting her from any harm during the mission. Shikaku said. The mission plan wasn't complicated. After all, Kazuo already knew it was a complete sham. Kakashi and Rin aren't needed at all. They only wanted Minato and me in the mission. Kazuo thought, feeling like releasing a long sigh, however his expression remained hardened. The mission begins immediately, Shikaku said as he straightened his back whilst still looking at Team 7. Yes, Minato immediately replied before motioning with his eyes for the rest of Team 7 to follow after him. The team headed out of the commander's tent without another word. However, as soon as they were out, Rin turned to Kazuo. Kazuo, you. It's alright, Rin, I'll come back alive, Kazuo said, his voice sounding wrong. It sounded too carefree considering the situation that he was in. Tears seemed to well up in her eyes, however they didn't drop. The young Kunoichi knew that she couldn't show weakness, for fear that it might affect Kazuo in any way. Alright, don't die. It's a promise, Rin said, causing even Kakashi to nod toward Kazuo. Minato meanwhile was simply looking at the interaction with a look in his eyes. Pity toward me won't change the fact that you are allowing your student to head off toward their death. This conviction of yours toward the village. It's annoying, Kazuo thought before Minato finally spoke up. Let's head off. FSH, 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 FSH. A split second later, all four of them disappeared from their spots, appearing tens of meters away before their figures flickered once more. A few minutes later, Rin and Kakashi split off, and finally a while later, Kazuo stopped. I'll be heading off, sensei. Minato stopped before handing Kazuo a kunai. It was his signature three-pronged one. As soon as I complete the assassination, I'll be there to save you, Kazuo. Don't worry about it, sensei. I'm not that easy to kill, Kazuo said with a light smile before vanishing from his spot, already flickering away. His speed was much higher than when he was running with Team 7. Minato's eyes widened slightly before a soft smile appeared on his face. Little rascal. A moment later, his figure vanished as well, his speed multiple folds that of Kazuo. It was like he had turned into a yellow flash of lighting as he passed through the forest toward his destination. Chapter 72, Kazuo continued running through the forest, his figure flickering as his speed surpassed even Jonin-level shinobi. His Shunshin jutsu had already reached a level beyond what most shinobi were able to achieve in their lives. It was an after-effect of both his stubbornness as well as talent. Finally, minutes later, Kazuo arrived at the destination. Making a single-hand seal with one hand, Kazuo burrowed himself underground with the hiding like a mole technique. Time to get this shit started, Kazuo thought to himself as he practically swam through the ground at high speeds. He had already calculated the distance in his mind, and thus he knew how long he would have to swim through the ground to reach the location where he would plant the explosion tags. Of course, even if he did fail and miscalculated, he could just try again. Arriving at the location in moments, he immediately pressed 2 fingers on his wrist guard, and in an instant, more than 600 explosion tags appeared before him. Because of the importance of the mission, Kazuo had actually been given 1,000 explosion tags, however he only used 600. A little stealing here and there is good for your health, Kazuo thought as he immediately took out a stack of paper. With a single hand seal, the paper converged together and turned into a long thin thread. This time, the range is even higher, Kazuo thought as he turned around and swam back through the ground whilst using the hiding like a mole technique. He had kept up the rotation of the chakra for the technique during the whole time. This wasn't as draining anymore as his chakra reserves had firmly become Chunin rank, as well as the fact that he had perfect mastery over the jutsu. It would have cost him even less, however he didn't have the earth elemental manipulation. It was at this moment as he was running further and further away that he noticed the ground around him start to tremble. Lightning jutsu, Kazuo thought before immediately jumping above ground and making a single hand seal. Tiger seal. Kai. There was silence for but a split second as Kazuo's chakra went through the paper string and arrived at the explosion tags. The very next instant, chaos engulfed the world. The ground shook terribly as 600 explosion tags were detonated at the same time. Boom! Explosion tags were usually exploded with a slight difference in activation time. However, to counter this, Kazuo had manipulated the paper string to attach to every single explosion tag, causing the explosion to fully reach its potential. Without even looking behind him, Kazuo used the body flicker jutsu and vanished from his spot. At the same time, his hands whirred into action as he got a substitution jutsu ready, using it immediately after his body flicker ended. Krong! With the sound of wood breaking, the log that he had substituted with was completely broken in half. Finally having the chance to look at his attacker, Kazuo saw someone he didn't expect. Yo, it's Killer Bee, here to bring the heat, dropping bars so hard, I'll knock you off your feet. For a moment Kazuo felt the world freeze as he looked at the man. What? Lariat! That was all Kazuo managed to say before he felt the world rotate on its head. Darkness enveloped his vision instantly. Waking up once more inside his home in the Leaf Village, Kazuo felt a headache. How the fuck am I supposed to deal with a damn Jinchuriki who can control his tailed beast? Kazuo thought in anger before his eyes widened. Isn't this an opportunity? Kazuo thought for the next second. The image of two cloud shinobi flashed through his mind. Two people who had gained the power of the nine-tailed beast after they had eaten its flesh. A small grin appeared on Kazuo's face. It's worth a try. If I can't handle the side effects, then I can simply end the turn. The question now is, how should I fight him? Kazuo thought as he tried to come up with a strategy. Thankfully, he had all the time in the world to do so, but it didn't take long for a preliminary plan to form in his mind. Following the same course of action as the last turn, Kazuo and Minato finally split paths. Kazuo, however, didn't head toward the location where he would detonate the tags immediately. Instead, he calculated the time after he had started running off after placing the tags. I have around 11 seconds. That would place me here, Kazuo thought as he arrived at the same location where he had died before. Raising his hands, Kazuo used his newest paper-style technique. Paper Person of God technique. 400 explosion tags rose up into the air and flew to the location where Killer Bee had stopped for a moment. The explosion tags are immediately camouflaged with the surroundings, making them completely invisible. This process took 10 seconds. Immediately after, Kazuo ran toward the mission location once more. Following his actions exactly, he followed the exact same escape path he had used before and the exact same jutsu. Yo, it's Killer Bee, here to bring the heat. Dropping bars so hard, I'll knock you off your feet. Looking at the man, Kazuo raised his hand and gave the guy a cheerful smile. This seemed to confuse Killer Bee for a moment. That was enough. Raising both his hands up, looking as if he was holding something back, Kazuo said with a cheerful tone of voice. Yo, you're about to go boom boom. Huh? This time, Killer Bee couldn't react in time as the ground underneath him lost its color, clearly showing the hundreds of paper tags. It was however too late for even him to run away, his body falling through the tags as they completely engulfed him. Asterisk boom. Asterisk. Art is an explosion, yo. Kazuo said, his voice sarcastic. Boom. And the world flipped on its head once more. I deserve that. Chapter 73, I deserve that, Kazuo thought as he saw the ceiling of his apartment once again. Following the same course of actions that he had performed during the previous turn, Kazuo arrived at the same scene. Killer Bee was engulfed by the explosion once more. There was however a difference this time. Using the body flicker jutsu, Kazuo changed his location immediately, evading a lariat just before it hit him. Killer Bee, with his clothes almost completely ruined and with his skin charred, stood where Kazuo had just been a split second ago. Looking at the man, Kazuo saw something interesting. Killer Bee's skin was regenerating at insane speeds. It wouldn't take longer than a minute for him to completely regenerate all of the damage that had been dealt to him by the explosion. Quickly gazing at where he had detonated the tags, Kazuo saw 4 charred octopus-like tentacles. In that instant, he managed to protect himself using the 8 tails. Kazuo thought before instantly using body flicker and appearing next to the tails. Killer Bee turned around and stared at Kazuo for a brief moment. "You're stronger than I thought," the man said, his voice sounding much more serious than it did before. "Am I?" Kazuo asked before lowering himself to the ground and touching one of the tentacles. Killer Bee didn't move for a moment, still staring at what Kazuo was doing, not daring to get closer to him when he was acting so suspiciously. Chakra flowed to Kazuo's hand and with a grabbing motion, he ripped apart a piece of flesh from the charred tail. It would have been much harder usually, however the fire had made it far easier, and the tail's flesh had softened enough that he could rip it casually with his hand. Without hesitating for a single moment, Kazuo brought the flesh to his mouth and began chewing it. "What the?" Killer Bee looked at the young leaf shinobi in complete surprise. "Stop him, Bee!" a voice said from inside his mind. Immediately after hearing the words, Bee didn't hesitate for a single moment, his body getting covered in a red cloak that seemed to bubble as if it was boiling. 8 tails appeared behind him, and his speed increased drastically as he practically teleported to Kazuo's location. His fist punched right through Kazuo. A clone? When? Killer Bee thought as he saw the Kazuo in front of him explode into a puff of smoke. Meanwhile, tens of kilometers away, Kazuo stood seated with his eyes closed in a meditating position. It was at this moment as the clone dispersed that he felt it. His own chakra together with a foreign malicious chakra had returned back to his body. Releasing a pained grunt, Kazuo started sweating all over. His expression scrunched up as he tried to withstand the pain that the new chakra was causing him. It felt like he was about to be eaten inside out, it was like his own blood and flesh had betrayed him. As if his very own body was rejecting him. "Alpha!" A piercing scream erupted out of his mouth as blood started flowing out of his eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. It was at this moment that a red bubbly aura started appearing around him, covering his body slowly but surely. The red chakra was eating at his own reserves and growing larger and larger by the second. Opening his eyes whilst gritting his teeth, Kazuo slowly stood up. It was at this moment that he saw Killer Bee appear once again. "You're insane, yo, completely deranged. Out of your mind, your whole vibe's rearranged," Killer Bee said as he looked at Kazuo. The next moment he appeared in front of the young shinobi, his arm already cocked back and ready to unleash its full power on Kazuo's head. FSH. Bang! The fist, however, hit nothing but the ground. Kazuo had disappeared. Turning his head, Bee saw Kazuo standing tens of meters away. Fast, he thought as he looked at the young ninja. In the split second it had taken for Bee to traverse the space between them and launch his punch. Kazuo had forcefully taken hold of the red chakra and used the body flicker jutsu, its power being magnified multiple-fold by the sheer raw power that the red-tailed beast chakra possessed. However, as a side effect, Kazuo couldn't control the distance of his body flicker at all. He had wanted to flicker away as far as he could, however he had only managed 27 meters. That wasn't the end of the problems as Kazuo saw another tail start growing behind his back. Feeling how his mind was getting cloudier by the second, Kazuo knew that he didn't have enough time nor strength to escape the situation or control the form. It's possible, however, Kazuo thought as a large grin appeared on his face. His teeth had changed as he had grown large fangs that almost protruded out even if his mouth was closed, giving him a monstrous look. But it's not worth it, Kazuo thought in annoyance the very next instant. Sure, the increase in strength is insane, however it's practically uncontrollable at my skill level currently, and even then, all it would do is place a target on my back. Danzo would also become a true and very real threat if he wasn't one already. Kazuo thought before releasing a sigh which got interrupted as he started coughing. Blood seeping through his mouth. Using the last of the remaining controllable chakra that he had, Kazuo forcefully controlled it and slammed it into his brain, causing it to explode instantly. Thump! As his body fell down, the red bubbly cloak around him also started disappearing. Killer Bee meanwhile simply stared at the dead shinobi in confusion. Time looped back once more. Huff huff. Looking at the same crusty ceiling again, Kazuo felt annoyed. Ah, I better get a good reward for this shit. Chapter 74. Getting up from his bed once more, Kazuo perfectly followed the actions that he had taken during the previous turn. Finding himself with another piece of the tailed beast's flesh in his hands, Kazuo dropped it instead of eating it. Why had he picked it up in the first place? He knew that by doing so, he would have a little more time than if he wasn't doing anything suspicious. And by dropping it, he was getting even more time, as he was quite sure that Bee had rushed at him after feeling a sense of danger, maybe a premonition of sorts. Or was it Eight Tails that warned him? Kazuo thought before opening his mouth once more. You know that I already survived the raikage once, right? Kazuo said as he looked at Bee. The man, however, didn't say a word. What makes you think that you were able to catch me? If even the raikage himself couldn't. Kazuo said as his smile grew wider. Big bro let you live, it was a fluke, yo. But now I'll show you the cloud's true spook, yo. Staring at the large shinobi, Kazuo sneered before saying. Your rhymes are pretty ass, yo, Kazuo said before using the body flicker instantly and appearing meters away. Killer Bee similarly also moved at that moment. He didn't even use the body flicker, and his physical speed alone was enough to catch up with Kazuo. As Kazuo continued to run around, with Killer Bee getting closer and closer, as well as knowing that the chakra reserves of the shadow clone were running out, he used one last body flicker and appeared in the middle of a small clearing. In an instant, Killer Bee reached his location, his left arm already extended horizontally as he prepared to sever Kazuo's head with a lariat. It was at this moment that Kazuo's face lit up with a large smile, his lips completely curled upwards. Boom! His entire body lit up instantly as over 100 explosion tags appeared on his body instantly. Before he even started running to the mission location, Kazuo had first created a shadow clone and set up the trap that would explode on Killer Bee when he chased after him. Besides that, he had also used around 100 explosion tags that he had planted all over the shadow clone, which he had hidden by using his paper technique. Everything, down to the last detail, had already been calculated by him. Now it was only a matter of if he was fast enough to reach Rin and Kakashi before retreating toward the leaf camp. Or if Killer Bee had a strong enough chakra sense that he would be able to pinpoint Kazuo and reach him before he regrouped with the others. Boom! The shadow clone finally exploded, engulfing Killer Bee entirely. A moment later, a figure walked out of the smoke. Looking like nothing had happened, without even a single scratch. The red bubbly cloak surrounding Bee had effectively nullified the entire explosion. That kid's trouble, yo, Bee said before hearing a voice inside his head. It was Kyuki, the eight-tailed beast. Leave him, go back to the camp. This must have been a distraction. I told you, but you just don't listen, do you, Bee? Kyuki said before sighing at its human vessel. Bee nodded before turning around and running at insane speeds toward the cloud camp. Meanwhile, kilometers away, Kazuo continued running with his full strength. Looking at his expression, one wouldn't think that he had just been in a fatal encounter with one of the most dangerous shinobi out there. His lips were curled upwards, clearly a joyous expression as he ran towards the meeting location. Though it is sad that I wasn't able to steal the Eight Tails chakra, it's also not too much of a downer. The downsides simply outweighed the benefits. Kazuo thought for a moment before the smile on his lips grew even wider. Besides, I would much prefer the 9 tails. Kazuo thought. After around 3 minutes, he finally saw the clearing where he would be meeting with Noera Rin and Hatake Kakashi. FSH. Using the body flicker jutsu, Kazuo appeared in the clearing instantly. Kakashi and Rin were in front of him. Kazuo! Rin practically screamed as her eyes lit up in joy. Let's go. I'm unsure if there's enemy shinobi chasing me. It's best for us to retreat back to the camp, Kazuo said instantly. After a brief moment, both Rin and Kakashi nodded their heads. Give me a soldier pill, I already used mine, Kazuo asked. Rin quickly complied as she handed him one of her own pills. Kazuo had already used his so that he could replenish the chakra he had lost while creating the shadow clone. After fleeing whilst using the body flicker with as much chakra as he could pour into the jutsu, he had been left almost dried once again. Popping the pill into his mouth, Kazuo nodded and immediately body flickered in the direction of the leaf camp. Kakashi and Rin followed behind him. If it was a usual team, then they would have had to wait for Minato to return. However, Team 7 wasn't normal. As well as the fact that all three of them knew that if Minato couldn't deal with the enemy and was injured, they would only become a burden in the fight rather than giving any actual help. Minutes passed as they continued running. At that moment, as they were hopping from tree to tree, a presence appeared next to them abruptly. With yellow hair and blue eyes whilst wearing a Jonin jacket. It was Minato Namikaze. "You're back, sensei," Rin said, her voice clearly showing her joy as she looked at Minato. "Yeah, I'm glad everyone looks alright," Minato said with a soft smile on his face, his eyes looking at Kazuo for a moment longer before he turned around and the four continued their running pace all the way to the leaf camp. Chapter 75. The four ninjas continued their running pace until they finally arrived at the Hidden Leaf Army camp. Heading inside of it, no one stopped them. With Minato Namikaze at the front, they have cleared a path and so they arrived at the commander's tent quickly. The guards standing outside merely gave the four a nod before allowing them to head inside. Walking inside the tent, the four were greeted with the sight of Shikaru and Shikaku Nara standing around the large wooden table whilst discussing strategies for their upcoming actions. As soon as the flaps of the tent were opened, they turned their sight toward the group. "Mission accomplished," Minato said as he walked toward the duo. "Great job as always, Minato," Shikaku said with a light smile on his face as he looked at his former classmate. Shikaru, meanwhile, merely nodded before turning his eyes to the young ninjas behind Minato. His eyes landed on Kazuo. Kazuo similarly was staring directly at his former commander and sensei of sorts. His lips curled upwards, and an expression that was borderline mocking appeared on his face. "Give me the report," Shikaku said as he gazed at the group. "Kazuo first." Kazuo nodded his head before walking closer to the man. His back was straight and a calm expression on his face. "After separating with Minato, I first headed further towards the location where I would be causing the disturbance. Before going there, however, I set up a trap with explosion tags before hiding it and then proceeded to make a shadow clone and give it the explosion tags," Kazuo said before Shikaku nodded and told him to proceed. After which, my shadow clone headed closer to the location and used the hiding like a mole technique to head underground. The real me turned around and headed farther away and hid myself. After detonating the explosion tags, the shadow clone continued to use the hiding like a mole technique to flee. Someone, however, was already on its tail, Kazuo said before his voice seemed to shake slightly, trying to portray the grim situation. After finding the earth around it starting to give up, likely from a lightning release jutsu, the shadow clone escaped from the ground and continuously used body flicker and substitution to arrive at the location of the trap that I had set up. Kazuo paused for a moment, looking like he was gathering the rest of his thoughts as he recounted the situation. "It was Killer Bee, the Eight-Tails Jinchuriki," Kazuo finally said, his words causing the ninjas around him to raise their eyebrows and widen their eyes. "I immediately led him into the trap and proceeded to explode the tags that I had set up there only to find the man completely unharmed. Thankfully, I used the substitution jutsu in time and managed to avoid a fatal strike to the shadow clone," Kazuo said before taking a deep breath. "His body was covered in a type of red cloak. It seemed to completely heal all of the explosion damage in moments before the man turned towards me. Thankfully, I was only a shadow clone. After the shadow clone was destroyed, I immediately turned around and started fleeing from the location toward Kakashi and Rin Noira. The man didn't follow after me. That's the entire report on my side," Kazuo said before taking a step backward and giving a nod. "I see, great job out there, Chunin Kazuo." After that, Minato gave his explanation of the events on his side. There wasn't much to say. The man had simply gone inside the enemy camp by teleporting before quickly finding the commander's tent in seconds and eliminating the target and all the shinobi advisors before teleporting to Kakashi. It had been a flawless assassination. The enemy hadn't even had time to react before the commander had his neck sliced. Especially with all of the commotion that Kazuo had caused. It had been as easy as taking candy from a toddler. Good job, Team 7. This mission will be considered an S rank in your resume. You are to head back to the Hidden Leaf Village and report to Lord Hokage as well as to give these scrolls to him. Shikaku said before taking out 2 scrolls from under the table and handing them to Minato. A nod of their head later, Team 7 headed out of the commander's tent. Inside of the tent, however, a new conversation had started. Managing to escape the 8 tails at only 13 years of age. He's quite the shinobi, just as you said. Shikaku said with a light smile on his face, however his eyes were cold, piercing as they gazed at Shikaru's figure. Right. That was the only thing Shikaru said in reply. Don't do it again, I've tolerated enough. There won't be another time. Shikaku said afterward, his voice completely devoid of emotion. Yes, sir. Good, you may head out. Shikaku said he knew that the man before him needed to complete his own report as well. His report to the root that was. A quick nod of his head later, Shikaru headed out before using a body flicker and arriving at his own tent. Heading inside, the man released a few chakra signals by bursting his aura before an Umbu member appeared before him. Mission has been accomplished. Arisa Yatsuki is dead. Side mission failed. Shikaru said before the faceless Umbu gave a nod and disappeared once more. The mission of eliminating the enemy commander had been completed. The side mission was the elimination of Chunin Kazuo. This mission had been given by a commander of the root troops. It hadn't been Lord Danzo, however Shikaru felt that soon, the Lord's attention would be turned towards the young shinobi. It was only a matter of time with how fast Kazuo was rising up in the shinobi circles. Sigh. Releasing a soft sigh, Shikaru walked to his bed before lying down and closing his eyes. Chapter 76. Meanwhile, Team 7 was heading back towards the Leaf Village. They were quiet as they ran, no conversation sparking as they continued on their way. Hours later they arrived close enough to the Leaf Village that Minato could finally teleport them without wasting much chakra. Putting their hands on their back, they instantly teleported in front of the Hokage Tower. Heading inside the large red circular building, the 4 of them were quickly allowed to head towards the Hokage office. Arriving in front of the wooden door, they heard a voice telling them to come in from the inside. They had yet to knock on the door at all. Chakra sensing. Kazuo thought as he together with Minato, Kakashi, and Rin headed inside. Heading inside, they were met with the 3rd Hokage of the Hidden Leaf, Sarutobi Hiruzen, sitting behind his large wooden desk. Team 7 reporting for a successful mission, Minato said as he walked to the front of the group, giving the Hokage a shallow bow before straightening up once more. A nod of Hiruzen's head later and Minato gave the report completely before giving the man the 2 scrolls that Shikaku had handed to him. Hiruzen placed the 2 scrolls on the side before nodding his head. Good, you are dismissed. Minato, stay back. Hiruzen said. Nodding their heads, the 3 young ninjas of Team 7 headed out of the Hokage office and outside of the Hokage Tower moments later. Anyone want to join me for a meal at Ichiraku? Kazuo asked as he turned toward the 2 ninjas. No, I'll be heading back home to rest, Kakashi said before giving Kazuo a nod and using the body flicker to disappear from sight. I'll be heading off to get some rest as well, Kazuo. See you next time, Rin said with a small soft smile on her face. A quick nod from Kazuo later, the trio fully separated. Walking through the village, Kazuo first headed toward Yakiniku-Q, getting a hearty meal before changing his direction and heading off toward Training Ground 7. Being a part of Team 7, he now had his own personal training ground that he could use, and as such he had no need to head toward Training Ground 1. Arriving at the training ground, he quickly started his training in the taijutsu style that Minato had taught him. He had yet to completely master it. After finishing around an hour of taijutsu kata training, he moved on to ninjutsu training, starting to practice the B-rank jutsu that he had yet to master. He was first going to master lightning jutsu. He had thought of a good plan of action for the future. The combination of Earth style as well as lightning style creates the explosion release Kekkajinkai. If I manage to combine that further with paper style, my power will increase several fold. However, I'm still quite far from actually achieving this plan. At most, it's only a faraway dream right now. Kazuo thought as he practiced his jutsu. His chosen lightning release jutsu had been Lightning Release, Lightning Great Ball. A lightning jutsu that was somewhat similar to the fire style, Great Fireball. However, instead of it being a jutsu that was released from the mouth, it was instead released through the palms of his hands before being connected together and forming a large ball filled with electricity. The next jutsu was Lightning Release, Shock Wave. It was a jutsu that released a large wave that surrounded him and shocked everyone around him. At higher levels of mastery, it could even be controlled further and only be released in one direction, further increasing its intensity. Hours passed before it became close to midnight. Stopping his training, Kazuo turned around and headed to his own apartment. After sleeping and waking up, Kazuo headed toward the 7th training ground once more. Arriving there, he was met with the sight of Kakashi and Rin sparring with each other whilst Minato and Kushina Uzumaki stood to the side chatting with each other. "Hello," Kazuo said with a large smile whilst waving his head. "Hey Kazuo," Kushina said as she gave him a wave back whilst Minato simply smiled and gave him a small wave. Kakashi and Rin didn't reply as they were still in the middle of the match. Looking at the two, Kazuo quickly saw who the winner would be. Nowhere Rin was still much weaker than Kakashi, be it in ninjutsu, taijutsu, or shuriken jutsu. Worthless really, Kazuo thought before continuing to head towards Minato. "So any missions, Minato-senpai?" Kazuo asked as he arrived in front of the man. A quick shake of his head later, Minato said with a smile. "The Cloud has already sent a letter saying that they are willing to start negotiations. The war is practically over," Minato said before his smile increased slightly. "For the next while, a few months or so, we won't be taking missions as a team. You all can continue taking missions alone or together, however, or join a Chunin team and complete missions with them," Minato said. "I see. Can we still use the training ground?" Kazuo asked curiously as he looked at the man. "Yes, at least until next year when the new Team 7 gets made." "Alright, thanks Minato-senpai," Kazuo said before walking further away and starting his taijutsu kata training. Opening his status menu, he saw that the taijutsu style had reached a new level. Namikaze, Ultra 2 Sif Swirling Reflex Taijutsu, 8 out of 10. Close, though the last 2 levels will take much longer. Kazuo thought before releasing a sigh and continuing to train the rest of his jutsu and moves that he could use in front of Team 7 without raising suspicion. "I should start training my elemental affinity as well," Kazuo thought as he threw shuriken whilst running around. He didn't know if he could become rusty in his skills since he had the system. However, it was best to stay in shape on the off chance that his skills could indeed degrade without practice. Ding! User has survived the 3rd Shinobi World War. User has gained. Chapter 77, Ding! User has survived the 3rd Shinobi World War. User has gained the following rewards. User bloodline has been activated by 3%. Random B rank hidden jutsu. User has gained 1 small grade stat upgrade. Looking at the line of text appearing before him on the blue holographic screen, Kazuo felt the urge to start jumping up and down on the spot. Don't laugh, don't laugh. Kazuo thought to himself as he felt the urge to release a laugh that would resemble what a young master from Chinese novels would release. Ahem. Placing his fist in front of his mouth, he quickly calmed himself down before thinking of claiming the rewards. In the next moment, all notifications disappeared from his view. The next second a new batch of them appeared, announcing that he had claimed the rewards. User's bloodline has reached 5%. User's skill has leveled up as a consequence. Rolling B rank hidden jutsu. User has gained the paper clone technique. Paper clone? A variation of the shadow clone, or is it a variation of the elemental clones? Kazuo thought for a moment before turning his gaze to the next notification. He couldn't try the jutsu out here in the open either way. A skill has been upgraded because of my bloodline activation? It's likely the time loop, isn't it? Kazuo thought as he opened the skill menu. Time loop, rank 2. This time he couldn't stop himself as a wide grin spread on his face. I didn't get any information even though the skill did level up, however, so it seems like I'll have to do some experimenting to find out just what the second rank entails. Kazuo thought. Next on the list was the status upgrade. Opening his status menu, Kazuo gave each stat a quick look. Stats. Name, Kazuo. Race, human. Age, 13. Rank, Chunin. Affiliation, Hidden Leaf Village. Strength, C. Endurance, C. Agility, C. Intelligence, B. Charisma, B. Chakra, C. One small grade upgrade available. Without wasting a single second, Kazuo placed the status point in his intelligence, raising its rank even further. Intelligence, B+. Good, this should make learning and mastering jutsu even easier than before. Kazuo thought before fully closing the system menu. It was time for some training once again. Hours passed and soon enough the evening arrived. Stopping his practice of the taijutsu kata of Minato's taijutsu, Kazuo turned around and started walking toward the exit of the training grounds. The rest of Team 7 had already left. They had even invited him to some Ichiraku, but he had politely refused. I'm still too weak, and from the looks of it, my increase in strength will be slowing down massively now that I don't have access to the war and easy missions from the system. Kazuo thought for a moment before a new thought entered his mind. With the war ending, that means that in around 2 years, Minato Namikaze will die and the Nine Tails will attack the Hidden Leaf. That will most certainly give a mission. Kazuo thought before his mind wandered to the attacker of said night. Obito Uchiha, I'll have to kill him during that night. With Madara already dead by that point, it is nowhere near as dangerous as before. However, to kill Obito Uchiha is something that's easy to say but quite hard to do. Kazuo thought as he scratched the back of his head in frustration. He had thought of ways to kill Obito hundreds of times, however he had always ended up blank. The man's eyes were simply too broken. He also has his Izanagi. Kazuo thought of more and more ways that Obito could escape him whilst he found no ways for him to defeat the man. Sigh. Releasing a long-winded sigh, Kazuo decided that he would have to ignore that plan for the moment, at least until he grew much stronger than he was at the moment. Walking through the streets of Konoha, Kazuo quickly arrived at his destination. It was the same rusty blacksmith shop that he had gone to get his training weights. Recently he had noticed that the weights had become useless. With strength on par with a Chunin and agility as well as endurance on the same level, the weights weren't doing much for him anymore. Ring! As soon as he opened the door, a bell rang signaling the owner that a customer had entered the shop. Hey! Kazuo said with a smile as he waved his hand at the man. Oh, you're back, kiddo. What do you need today? The man said in reply, a soft smile on his face. I wanted to get the gravity seals. I've already exceeded these guys. Kazuo said with a smile as he showed the training weights on his wrist. Ooh, a hard worker, aren't you? The man said with a chuckle before turning around and grabbing a pair of 4 training weights. They had a beige color and were inscribed with a Fuinjutsu seal of some kind. To increase the resistance on them you simply have to pour in chakra into the seal at the front, whilst to lower it you need to pour chakra into the seals at the sides of the weights. The man said as he placed the weights on the counter. They didn't make any sounds, appearing light. Fuinjutsu really is mysterious. I'll have to get Minato to train me on them before he dies. Kazuo thought as he opened his ninja bag, looking for the money to pay for the seals. Ah, you can also just give me the seals you bought last time and just pay the difference. The blacksmith said before Kazuo could take out the full amount. Are you sure, sir? I don't mind paying. It's quite all right. I've heard all about your contributions to the village, young Kazuo. The man replied with a hearty smile. Nodding his head, Kazuo gave back the seals he used and paid the difference before grabbing the gravity seals and heading out of the shop. Immediately wearing them, Kazuo quickly adjusted the resistance with the seals before finding a level that was slightly higher than the weights he had just given back and then continuing to walk towards his apartment. Chapter 78. On the west district of the Hidden Leaf Village stood a three-story apartment complex. Bang! A noise was heard from inside of the rooms in the building. Aw fuck, and here I thought that I had escaped those fucking dreams. A slightly deep voice said. Step, step, step. The sound of steps was heard as the person walked towards the front of the complex where a large window stood, allowing him to look at the sight below. Even early in the morning, the street below was bustling with tens of villagers going about their daily lives. How long has it been since the last time I had a mission with those guys? Turning around, he looked to the right where a large full-body mirror stood. The mirror reflected the figure of a young teen, with short black hair and abyss-like black eyes. He was wearing black shinobi pants and a dark green Jonin vest and a Konoha headband tied around his forehead. He stood at 5'10", quite tall for a leaf shinobi. It was Kazuo. Well then, I better get going. Kazuo thought as he walked outside of the apartment, making sure to lock the door behind him before using a sealless body flicker to disappear seemingly into thin air, only to reappear on the roof of a building almost 100 meters away. This flickering continued until he arrived before the large green gates of the Hidden Leaf Village. There he saw two people already waiting for him. Yo, it's been a while, Kakashi, Rin, Kazuo said as he waved his hand with a soft smile on his face. Hey Kazuo, where have you been? Rin replied excitedly as she walked closer to him, her expression excited as she gave Kazuo a hug. Just training. I'm still trying to get that Jonin qualification. Kazuo replied before he saw Kakashi nod his head. Still as silent as ever? Yeah, that's Kakashi all right, Rin said with a light giggle. So, what's our mission this time? Kazuo asked curiously. Let's get going, I'll explain on the way, Kakashi replied before flickering in the direction of the gates. Nodding their heads, Kazuo and Noara Rin quickly followed their teammate. Minutes after, already more than a few kilometers away from the village, Kakashi finally spoke. We're heading to the Hidden Mist Village to meet up with some of our spies there as a routine check, Kakashi said before throwing a light blue scroll towards Kazuo who quickly caught it. Unfurling the scroll, Kazuo felt a slight headache. It's that mission, isn't it? Just then, as if to further cement his prediction, a bell-like sound rang inside Kazuo's mind. Ding! Mission has been generated. Survive the Kiri mission. Rewards, Random Elemental Affinity Mastery. Sigh. Releasing an inward sigh, Kazuo handed the scroll to Rin who was running next to him. This will be quite hard. Minutes turned into hours before the climate and environment around them started to change. The once dense forest turned into a murky swamp. We'll be camping here for the night. Tomorrow we will arrive at the meeting location, Kakashi announced before nodding his head toward Kazuo. Giving a nod in reply, Kazuo quickly lowered himself to the ground and placed 5 fingers down on the dirt below. Closing his eyes, Kazuo focused for a brief moment. Earth style, tremor sense. Immediately after, he started to feel all of the vibrations of the earth. Snapping his eyes open, Kazuo didn't say a word before disappearing from his location. 10 seconds later, he was back holding a man by the neck. Just a couple of bandits, I eliminated all but the leader in case they had any useful information, Kazuo said placing the frightened man down on the ground. Good job, I'll take over from here, Kakashi said with a nod before walking to the man and lifting his headband which he used to cover one of his eyes. As soon as the bandit leader gazed into Kakashi's left eye, the Sharingan that he had been gifted from Obito Uchiha, he lost consciousness. Straightening himself up once more, Kakashi turned to Kazuo and Rin, his hand moving at imperceptible speeds as it grabbed the short blade on Kakashi's back and used it to slice the man's head off. Nothing useful. I see, Kazuo replied before turning towards Rin. During the time that they spent capturing and interrogating the bandit, Noara Rin had already set up camp. Who's taking the first watch? Rin asked as she turned toward the two. I'll take the first watch, Kazuo second and you last, Kakashi replied to Rin. He's doing this so that Kakashi and I are in better condition whilst Rin's condition doesn't matter as much as she is a non-combatant. Kazuo thought before nodding to the gray-haired ninja and heading into his tent. I would have done the same, just that I would have switched Kakashi's and my placement. Kazuo thought to himself as he lay down and closed his eyes. Sleep was fast, something he had trained so as to be able to get sleep even in the most dire circumstances if he wanted to. Around 2.5 hours later, Kazuo was woken up by Kakashi's voice. "Wake up, it's your turn." "All right, have a nice rest," Kazuo replied as his eyes snapped open and he got up from the bed. Heading outside, Kazuo walked to the middle of the camp where a small stone stood and sat down. Status: Kazuo thought. Name: Kazuo. Race: human. Age: 13. Affiliation: Hidden Leaf Village. Rank: Elite Chunin. Strength: C+. Endurance: C+. Agility: B. Intelligence: B+. Charisma: B. Chakra: C+. Skills: Namikaze Taijutsu, 9 out of 10. Advanced Shuriken Jutsu, 6/10. Shadow Clone Jutsu, 10 out of 10. Summoning, Lightning Flash Blade Creation, 10/10. Enhanced Water Bullet, 10 out of 10. Hiding Like a Mole Jutsu, 10 out of 10. Paper Clone, 10 out of 10. Paper Shuriken, 10/10. Paper God Technique, 10 out of 10. Paper Illusion, 7 out of 10. Fire Style, Great Annihilation, 4 out of 10. Lighting Style, Great Lightning Ball, 8 out of 10. Lightning Style, Shock Wave, 9 out of 10. Earth Style, Iron Skin, 5 out of 10. Earth Style, Tremor Sense, 8 out of 10. Water Release, Water Formation Wall, 7/10. Combination Jutsu, Enhanced Electric Water Bullet, 8 out of 10. His list of jutsu had grown leagues compared to 8 months ago. He had managed to almost completely learn all of the B-rank jutsu that he had practically stolen. He had also further advanced his knowledge of the paper style, managing to even create his own jutsu. Paper Illusion. Chapter 79, Paper Illusion was a sealless jutsu that Kazuo had created on his own. By using hundreds of papers and setting up a large box of sorts with a single entrance, Kazuo could lure the enemy into it and thus change the entire appearance of the surroundings. This could be used to make an illusion that looked as if the enemy had just stepped into a large ravine or anything that Kazuo wanted. It would create a momentary distraction and loss of balance which Kazuo could use to gain the upper hand in combat. That, however, was only one of the uses of the jutsu. The principle was that Kazuo could use the paper jutsu to create a cover or an illusion on anything using the papers, and since it was the papers that were changing and causing the illusion instead of injecting chakra into the opponent's brain, it couldn't be released with a kai. Even if the enemy found out that they were in an illusion and tried to release themselves from it, they would find that they were unable to. This would cause even further distress and give Kazuo an even larger upper hand in the fight. The hours quickly passed and soon enough it was time for Kazuo to head back and get some more rest whilst Noara Rin took her turn to stay on watch. Lying down on his bed, Kazuo fell asleep almost instantly. He knew that this was one of the chances that the enemy had to kidnap Rin, however he actually wished for such an outcome. Enemy ambush! A loud voice was heard. It was Rin's voice. Immediately both Kakashi Hatake and Kazuo jumped to their feet and headed out of their tents. Kakashi already had his short sword in his hand whilst Kazuo had 2 kunai, one on each hand. Looking around they quickly realized the situation. Rin was being carried away on an enemy shinobi's back whilst 10 shinobi were surrounding Kakashi and Kazuo. Damned, Kakashi muttered before his sword was immediately covered in lightning. His headband already lifted and his Sharingan had flared to life as it spun in a clockwise rotation. Zing! In a split second, Kakashi had already arrived at the first shinobi and had chopped the man's head off cleanly with a single slash of his sword. Kazuo meanwhile used the body flicker and immediately appeared before his opponent. "You bastard, just die." the man said as he gazed at Kazuo and lifted his sword up high before slashing downwards directly toward Kazuo's head. Lifting his right arm, Kazuo placed it in front of him whilst leaning his left side further towards the enemy. For a moment, the enemy was startled. Was this guy really going to sacrifice his arm? However, it was already too late to turn the slash around, and so he poured even more strength into it. Clang! With the sound of metal hitting metal, so unlike the sound of a sword slashing flesh, the sword stopped right on top of Kazuo's arm. Earth-style, iron skin. It was an earth-style jutsu that covered a specific part of the user's body in chakra-enhanced earth, causing it to be impervious to most blows. The sword rebounded and the man slightly lost his balance. This was enough for Kazuo, who had already been leaning toward the man. With a quick swipe of his sword, the man's jugular was cleanly cut. Without stopping for even a slight second, Kazuo used the body flicker once more and appeared behind his next opponent, leaving the man he had just fought on the ground and holding his cut neck, blood overflowing through his fingers as he tried to stop the bleeding. However, it was too late. Thump! The next enemy didn't even sense Kazuo before he arrived behind him. Kazuo's speed was immense, and his body flicker was completely mastered, something only a small percentage of ninjas had ever managed to achieve. Body flicker jutsu, 10 out of 10. SHCLK. With a bloody sound of metal tearing flesh, the man's spine was cleanly cut from his head. Thump! Next, Kazuo thought as he disappeared once more and reappeared before his next opponent. This time he was against 3 enemy shinobi who were staying back to back with each other so that they would be able to put up a better defense. Dumb Kazuo thought as he immediately changed direction and headed toward another opponent who was alone and looking left and right, his expression clearly frightened as his arms holding a single kunai shook from fear. SCHLK. He never even saw Kazuo before his left eye was pierced by a kunai, effectively piercing his brain and killing him instantly. Behind Kazuo, at the location of the 3 men grouped together, a loud explosion was heard. Boom! At the start of the battle, just before heading outside, Kazuo had made a shadow clone and handed it around 20 explosion tags before sending it underground with the hiding like a mole jutsu. After seeing the group, Kazuo had slammed the ground 4 times on his foot, alerting the shadow clone underground, who was using tremor sense and telling him the location of his enemies. Looking at the spot behind him, all Kazuo saw were charred remains of what once were living shinobi. Tearing his gaze away instantly, Kazuo gazed at the battlefield once more. There were no enemies left. Kazuo had killed 6 of them in quick succession, whilst Kakashi had quickly finished the 4 others and immediately started chasing the ones that had kidnapped Noira-rin. Using the body flicker, Kazuo quickly chased behind the young ninja. Kakashi, stop! Immediately at his words, Kakashi stopped his chase and turned to face Kazuo. It could be a trap and you know it. We will save Rin, but not like this. Kazuo said as he looked at Kakashi, who stood silent for a moment before releasing a sigh and nodding his head. Good, now let's chase after them more slowly and carefully, Kazuo said as he nodded toward Kakashi, who quickly bit his finger and used his summoning jutsu. Chapter 80, Good, let's chase after them slowly. We wouldn't want to fall into a trap, Oswell. We would be saying goodbye to ours and Rin's life if that happened. Kazuo said towards Kakashi, who nodded his head after a moment of thought and then lifted his hand to his mouth. Biting his thumb until the skin tore and a trickle of blood appeared, Kakashi quickly lowered his hand and quickly made a set of hand signs. Summoning jutsu, Kazuo thought as he saw Kakashi slam his hand onto the ground and a puff of smoke appeared an instant later. Damn unhygienic as hell. Kazuo thought as he saw what Kakashi had summoned. It was a small brown dog with a blue Noha headband tied around his neck. Track this scent, Kakashi said as he immediately took out a piece of cloth from his ninja bag. He always kept a piece of cloth from all of his teammates in times like this, so that he could be prepared to track them down. The dog nodded its head and quickly took a few sniffs of the fabric before nodding its small head once more and turning towards the direction where Kazuo and Kakashi had seen the ninjas run. They wouldn't have needed the dog for tracking earlier, however. If they were going to do this slowly, then they could lose track of the enemies after a while, as they would be too far ahead of them when running at much higher speeds. They couldn't use Kakashi's Sharingan either, as it took way too much chakra, and even if they did find the enemy faster that way, Kakashi would already be too spent to defeat them. Nodding his head at the pup, Kakashi quickly took it off the ground and put it on its shoulder, where the dog quickly latched itself on his neck. "Let's go. Every 3 minutes you use Tremor Sense, Kazuo," Kakashi said as he immediately used the body flicker. Kazuo nodded his head and quickly followed behind him. Unlike before, the two of them were going at a much slower pace and checking their surroundings closely so that they could detect any traps that the enemy might have set. Rustle. Hearing the rustle of a bush a dozen meters away, Kazuo quickly turned his attention and saw a large amount of kunai and shuriken heading towards them. A trap. Without using a single seal, Kazuo quickly channeled his chakra in a certain pattern. Thrank. The kunai quickly hit his body, however that was merely an illusion, as with a puff of smoke, in place of Kazuo, a log of wood appeared. Looking at his previous location, Kazuo saw that Kakashi had followed his example and now was standing a few feet away from his previous location, having used a substitution as well. "Seems like you were right, Kazuo. They did plan on kidnapping Rin from the start. Though I'm unsure why," Kakashi said as he started running once more, Kazuo quickly following behind him. "I don't have an idea either. Both my reputation and yours far surpass that of Rin. I can understand capturing you, who had a Sharingan and are the son of the White Fang as well as the greatest genius of the leaf, but nowhere a Rin?" Kazuo said before releasing a humming sound. "Unless they wanted to capture her so that they could lead us somewhere, as I previously said, this feels quite like a trap set up for us." "That's true, however, even if it's a trap, I don't plan on abandoning Rin," Kakashi replied, his voice harsh as he said his last words. "I don't plan on it either, it's just an observation of the situation we are in currently," Kazuo said as he continued following Kakashi's lead. Minutes turned into hours as Kakashi and Kazuo continued following Rin's kidnappers. Finally, as the new day was coming to a close in the evening hours, Kakashi and Kazuo found Rin once more. She was lying in an alley of sorts whilst around 10 men were guarding her. "Just what is this?" Kakashi mumbled to himself before releasing a sigh. In an instant before he could fully release his breath, Kakashi disappeared from his location, appearing in the middle of the enemy group instantly. He had already made Kazuo confirm that there were no other enemies besides the ones guarding Rin. Having confirmed that fact, he was more than confident enough in dispatching this group. Kazuo, who saw the scene in front of him, had a slight grin on his face as he saw Kakashi rush in. "Seems like they've already sealed the three tails inside her. They only left 10 guards behind, but even these guys are merely weak fakes who were abandoned by the mist. They are planning to let Rin go in the first place, however they need to keep the plan hidden," Kazuo thought as he quickly analyzed all of the information that he had just gained as well as the information that he knew from the anime in his past life. "They however won't let me and Kakashi leave alive. That was the reason that they were chasing after Kakashi and Rin after he saved her. They only plan on letting Rin return to the Leaf Village so that she can go out of control and then release the three tails in the middle of the hidden leaf, causing mass chaos to ensue," Kazuo thought before slightly shaking his head. Even that plan is merely there to hide the real one. After all, the hidden mist is already under Madara's control. The real reason is that whilst chasing behind Rin and Kakashi and causing them to feel like there is no way out for them, Rin sacrifices herself after learning this so-called hidden plan of the mist, and right at that moment Obito sees her death, causing his eyes to evolve into the Manjiki Sharingan. Kazuo thought before releasing a sigh. "Well, it's time that I head into the battle as well. I have to keep up appearances here." That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in part 5. Peace.